Well, thank you so much, Jesse, for inviting me to participate and to chat with you today. Uh, I think the piece is so great, and I'm eager to discuss it. Uh, so maybe we could begin just by you telling me a bit about the origins of the piece and
Mhm.
what you were thinking.
Sure. Um, I was looking at Touching Shay works lately, the 1 year performance piece,
Mhm.
using domestic space and the time philosophically that are both imposed by political culture and, of course, the labor in there. And, of course, the Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debora, which I learned from you when I was a student, the idea of intangible object mainly inspired by these ideas. And with 6 different amazing artists who are on board with me, thinking about fragmented identity imposed by dominant misplacement of culture, I came up with this idea, intangible object. The definition of intangible is something you cannot touch, see, or smell in any senses. Basically, it's not there physically. The metaphorical way of saying intangible object as our identity, I ask artists to express or define their identity on the wood panel, um, letting artists know that the possession will be temporarily in their space, what caused you to make, and knowing that your artwork might be distorted, scrapped, or even gone. What does that make different? And thinking about human anthology and history, it is how we are walking through, right? And the history is reshaping, rewriting, and eliminating by power most of the times, and it creates the gap. And similar to history and culture, especially when it comes to the object represent specific culture, there are gaps from culture and what we know caused by mass reproduction in capitalism and, of course, postmodern society. This manufactured label or the marginalize a group of people in the society. So, for an example, I would not say I have Korean culture in my background just because I was born in Korea, but personal culture and relationship within my domestic space with my family is something else than labeling as Korean culture. And I would not say it is same with other artists, obviously, and I can strongly say their responses to my question is showing through the work.
Great. Wow. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think well, first of all, the question of kind of how to get out from or to thematize mass production, and in particular the production of images, is a really interesting one. And it seems to me that you've invited us to think along these lines through the works. Is seriality, moving from one stage to the next, as well as questions of transference and the passage of time. And so you've sent an object between artists, and each person has modified it in a kind of, it's like an exquisite corpse or something.
Mhm.
Um, could I wonder if we could just kind of walk through each stage so that those who are listening can get a sense of how it all worked.
Sure. I was really interested at the characteristic of impermanence, transference, and documentation in intangible object. It is, really relevant with our American dream journey and the story of the process while we were shipping. And I wanted to collect all the stamps and marks on the box. But since the mailbox is distorting while shipping, people had to use another box and store the stamps and marks in a separate bag. And Jasmine forgot to send the materials to Nibi, and we lost the written history of geographical improvement. But I do think that as part of this project, forgetting and erasing. This might be a bit of, your question, but we as a group are working on other projects and will be exhibited virtually again after a month. But it is about the symbolism of American dream. And at the some point, United States gained or achieved the title safer place and better living place looking from the outside of the United States, especially the Bay Area, where I'm living in. And as the number of immigrants grow, the value of visas are growing as well. But when we are looking as being inside of the states, we realize the propaganda of American dream and being part of huge bubbles, right? And the transference of physical migration and the impermanence of psychological culture space and fragmented history is shown through the piece. And that's not necessarily saying this piece as a warning note that do not come to the United States, but bringing the awareness of what we are marking in the history or the community. And I just want to touch Michael's and Vivian's piece, and everyone in the group in person for a while, and knowing his works did not make me surprised that he shot the oud panel. He currently is working on objects right for his personal works, and borrowing his words, he stated objects carry right in the way that transcends the concept of him. Objects carry a narrative of truth, whether seen or not. And when objects change hands, does the narrative get overridden or does it become part of? So Michael's process of shooting on the silhouette, which is universal as well as the bullet holes, um, he left a permanent mark with the visual limitation. And in a way of shooting, he wanted to turn violence toward the source of violence toward people like us, minorities. And Vivian's response, it's really striking me also. And one of the discussion we had as a group, we talked about how the teeth in the society define people's modernity. Is your teeth white enough or is your teeth aligned? So she responded as fracturing the imposition of her teeth, the representation of economical achievement over a Michael silhouette. So both Michael and Vivian visualize the intangible violence that imposed on humans and them with their responses.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. First few stages of this piece. I mean, with Michael's especially, the sort of opening shot recognizes the extent to which our capacity to be political subjects is underwritten or initiated by kind of violence, which is very, it's literalized in the work, right? And then as you say, Vivian's piece uses the teeth, and we can see it here now, this sort of active mutilation, or a kind of violence done to the body is present here as well. um, do you, what do you make of this, of these violent gestures? What, or maybe I should phrase the question this way: when you saw, because you didn't see uh, what what was being done to the work throughout the process, right? It was only at the end that you were able to watch the video of Michael shooting the canvas, right? And then Vivian hitting this mold with a hammer. So what was your reaction to that, and what did you, elaborate a bit for me on what you were thinking?
Well, it's as a curator, I kind of know what people were gonna plan to do.
Yeah.
Michael shot the panel, Vivian smashed the teeth mold, and Oscar's putting the portraits of with a people artist and pouring the red paint on the back of bullet holes in response to um, defining we as a group are expressing. And Irene's printmaking process by revisiting the surface bring the echoes of unheard voices to witness,
Mhm.
and Jasmine's desperate desire to remove her given identity by opening the empty space as she is eliminating the traces.
Mhm.
And Nivi created another space with the object. A little bit more about Nivi's response or artwork titled as By Heart. She filled information using digital tools. She was thinking of agency and authorship of information and giving the object a capacity of documentation itself. And her virtual space filled with history was very dynamic. And it's really interesting to see as a panel is moving along, even we all did not know like who's gonna do what. Every artist's responses were very relevant to humans' historical chronological order. Um, the panel damaged, added, or raided, revisited, hidden, removed, and created another space. And I really, and everyone really enjoyed and surprised about how every process are coming along together.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting that on the one hand you have this artifact of practice, a document which has traces on it, right, from its various uses. On the other hand, each individual is blind to what's to the kind of narrative that's taken place. So there's this sort of forensic practice or reconstructive practice that I suppose people are invited to do. Maybe we can talk about this more, but maybe not every artist felt the need to wonder who did what, right? In other words, taking the object as a given was licensed its own kind of practice or its own kind of thinking in a way. Um, Maybe we could talk about this moment and sort of removing, because it was again a canvas, and so removing what was on it and allowing the frame to exist, and then wrapping the wrapping what was there. Could you walk me through this a bit?
The removing part,
Yeah.
sure. Well, referencing another favorite essays of mine, Compositional Subjects by Laura Hyunhee Kang, she talked about the intervening slash. I'm directly referencing it. The intervening slash in Asian slash American woman is diacritically awkward shorthand for the cultural, economic, and geopolitical pressures of the continental, which is Asian, and the national American, and the racial ethnic, which is Asian American, as they come to bear on an implicitly more solid gendered ontology, which is woman. And for especially for Jasmine's piece, eliminating every surface that she had um, is, she had a lot of pressures that um, she came from China and she's titled as Chinese because of the geographical um, label. So, in order to eliminate this pressure, she just, expressed like removing all the panels, removing all the traces, and removing all of her histories is being expressed really powerfully from her documentation, I think.
Yeah, definitely. This sort of refusal of the buildup of characteristics or the imposition of signifiers, I guess, on the object. Um, and then when it came to you, because you were the last, even though you initiated the project, you were the last
Mhm.
artist to handle the object and make something of it. Tell us maybe about what you decided to do.
The original idea as I curated this project was to paint on the panel as a painter, right? And I somehow expected that I will be receiving not this story panel, but when I received the panel from Nivi, the dirts were coming out of the box, and when I opened the box, there was like so many fragmented wood pieces and different disparate parts of other artworks. And I decided to stretch the linen over it as what painter does, but with different intention. If I stretch the canvas or linen for purpose of painting, stretching over the linen, over everyone's artwork is giving an object a new surface, hoping that there will be another context it create on top of the linen based on the history. It might sound romanticized utopia, but giving another surface on top of the stretcher bar, it is sort of breathing space for me.
Yeah, that's great.
And who know,
Yeah,
I
so
might paint on the surface.
yeah, you have this. You still have the canvas now.
Mhm.
So do you think there will be another iteration in your with regard to this piece?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah. Um, I wonder. I mean, I'm so taken with all of the, as I said before, thematically, it's very rich, right? Because there's all of these different sorts of the practical dimensions, just express really nicely some of the more um, yeah, conceptual or thematic issues that you're working with, like this sort of build up and breakdown, or we talked before about kind of a violence done to the image or the deterioration of the image. Um, I wonder if you could maybe for us connect this set of processes to some of the other issues that we the people in general is working on. So democracy, you mentioned the concept of the American dream, and of course the experience of migrancy or migration. Um, would you want to say anything about it?
Sure. During the time of COVID-19, the conditions of not being able to meet, but I still see them through this little screen as a paradox, right? And that is another context of conversation that we can keep on going, but technology, right? And anyway, while we are Zooming, there are, of course, the internet connection always was the challenge. Sometimes through the screen, we see other people's past and future because, like people say, like, you're freezing, you're breaking. Um, Most of us live in California, but Vivian travels a lot because of her work as a filmmaker, and Michael lives in Texas. So in the beginning, the distance was challenging us, but also a possibility to create the mailing process like intangible object. And especially for intangible object, I was interested in shipping living marks on the packet. And while shipping, the distortion and the fact that this real object traveled from Texas, San Francisco, Sunnyvale, San Jose is giving a weight and history. Um, there were times that we had to meet, but those times we all did COVID tests the day before we were meeting, and most of the times we met through the Zoom. Um, COVID-19 situation definitely tearing us down for, and also many systems that we used to have. But by knowing that we have privilege to talk about work and make work, the Wida people and the intangible object was able to be created.
Wonderful. Yeah, I really think that each project within We the People, it calls attention to uh, infrastructures of relation, right? Some of which we may not think about all the time. So, I mean, the post office is an interesting one because, of course, this last year we had a whole nationwide political dispute about the post office and what it meant and what it could do and how it facilitated voting, right? But here you've shown how it can forge connections across artistic practices. And likewise, Zoom, right? Not to name the proprietary software, but here we are, connecting and indeed engaging different participants who are located in parts of the country. Uh, and I was thinking too about American language having the table as this site that that people gather around and so on. And also a COVID test, right? The kind of medical infrastructure that arises so that we can meet, right? So it alludes, this project, again, even though it's very compartmentalized at certain moments, or it is experienced in a partial way at certain moments, at times it sort of opens up, and you can see the underlying grid work that makes it possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking, let's see, if you could, I just wonder if you could maybe talk about some of the other projects that, that have been a part of We the People, and like what kinds of connections you see. Like American language, I think, is a great example because it is, they're all collaborative, but it, involves this kind of formal combination of practices overlaid onto one another.
Mm-hmm. Um, the work Wida people makes has a common language, which we as an artist are experiencing the stop sign in our life as an immigrant or people in color. And, thinking about this label, the idea of oversimplification as an American language through our personal performances, and more than that. However, in intangible objects specifically, it's more about totalized scheme and using personal histories which was already imposed on individual, and through the process of expressing on score size ut panel, which can be a new window or marginalized space. In terms of saying that word object, the object is also sarcastic. I use this term a lot in my personal work too, but objectified perspective to a certain culture. So within the frame, artists have encountered this object in front of their life. So it's very symbolic and very unidentical. Even we have a common language as an, you know, immigrant.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk about some other stages in the project. Like I was thinking about Irene's work, which seems to me somewhat different from some of the other examples because it's uh, adding, in a way, sort of beatifying the object, but there's also a kind of as you suggested, a sort of like anxiety or something that provokes this action of printing. Could you tell me a bit more about it?
Sure. Irene's piece, she received it after Oscar painted, after Michael shot the panel, and then Vivian smashed the teeth mold, and then um, Oscar put our portraits of Buddha people artists and, painted the red paint on the back of the bullet holes. But she actually revisited the surface and it, as carving around the traces, she really wanted to emphasize the echoes. And then, it's called ghost printing. She put the ink on it and then she printed over the used ink. That's called ghost painting, but it is really bringing the feeling of echoes, right? Like you see in the documentation, carving directly onto the object, and then she printed from it and making reproduction of it is relevant to our discussion about mass reproduction in the society too. Um, is another way of going to response to the intangible object compared to other people's responses. But I guess for me, it really stood out that she made another object from this object in printmaking.
Yeah, yeah, it's really extraordinary. And then I was also wondering about Nivi's piece and the sort of like almost scientific precision, that she employed in engaging the object.
Right. Nibi, she, I got a call from Nibi after she received from Jasmine. She called me, hey Jesse, I don't have anything to work on because I have nothing. As a painter, I cannot paint. I expected something else. And we laughed together. And um, she decided to, as I mentioned before, she decided to treat this object as an information, mass information. And then again, revisiting the historical way of this object is having. And then like the history is doing with our history, she labeled every pieces of the fragmented piece. And then again, bringing this physical physical object to virtual space, she created another video based on what she is consuming, what she is achieving through this object. Um, it's really interesting because she works with audio and the video um, in the intangible object, and the dynamic relationship between, like I said before, with the screen and the people physically is giving us different perspective of looking at the object.
Yeah, along those lines, I wonder if you could say a bit about it doesn't just have to be intangible object, but in this whole process as a painter, what has it been like to do performance, to do video work, to do the social practice project? How has your own practice changed or developed along these lines?
It's funny because I most of the times, introduce myself as a painter or printmaker, and that's what I mostly to do. Um, but when the COVID-19, when the state lockdown happened, I was a student still and enrolled at SFAI, and I had to leave the studio where I was able to work, right? Like able to have 60 by 6 inches panel a lot in the studio and able to paint, like for all the time for 24 hours. And coming back to my parents' house, I live in my parents' house right now. And coming back to my old bedroom, which is small and not able to keep up the original practice that I used to do, it was very stressing, and um, the COVID-19 and BLM movement and the huge wildfire in California was just crazy and made me so confused. Like, what should I do next as an artist? Like, what should I do? And I still was talking with many artists from SFAI, and I was thinking about we should talk about this. We should talk about identity. And as a green card holder, I always wanted to talk about how my identity is created, like within the space, within the culture, within the city. So that's how I invited artists over to the group with the people. And the ever like the it's really the best period of the time in 2020, having endless conversation about our thinking, during the COVID-19 and our identity, and meeting Vivian, filmmaker, Irene, printmaker, and Michael, printmaker and also photographer, and different, like media artists. It's just opening the box, opening the context for me to, do more things, do use another mediums to create the visual language.
I wonder too, we've talked before about your other work, your paintings, which seem to be a kind of self-portrait, but not in the most kind of direct or literal sense, right? Playing with landscape and memory and color, of course. How do you see this work as it relates to that dimension of your practice, as a kind of self-portrait or not? Right?
Hmm. For that question, we can talk about reproduction and original, right? You know, I, as a parent, also printmaker, my works are totally different between painting and my prints. And people ask me like why your painting and why your prints are so different. It should be, you know, same or similar topic. And as you mentioned before, like my paintings are about the body, gender in the body, and gestures, and of course, the fabrics, how the fabric is elaborating the gender and history. But in my printmaking, I do more about research and research how, like the manufacture labels and reproduction of houses in the society. Um, and bringing this experience of working as, with a people artist is something else, as another body of the work, talking about not talking about but using my own body, for American language. I did performance for the first time in my life, and we're doing new things for us, virtual thing, the meeting and through the Zoom. um it's I just don't think artists should not really, like, I don't know, have themselves in one context or one medium, But the situation we are going through is if we cannot choose one specific medium, then we choose another medium to do something, to talk about what we want to say.
Yeah, definitely. Well, would you also tell me a bit about your, while I have you here, would you also tell me a bit about your contribution to the Passage of the Tortoise?
Sure. Passage of the Tortoise are being curated for that project, and um, the title is My Butari, and Butari is the traditional Korean club. So I have it in my home too, but we use differently based on the history's use, right? History's purpose. Um, Thinking about what traditional cultural object I have in my domestic space and in relationship to historical uses. Um, I wanted to kind of emphasize like the pressure again, like Jasmine talked about in Intangible Object, pressure as being Korean, Asian, American immigrant. So I used the labor. I sawed everything together, and Irene printed the label for me. I created um, the manufacturer look label printed in gold, saying the name and product name, and it state the size. And while I was sawing, I was thinking about I should create the domestical like visual space. So having the psychological space with the label on the front, on the back, I use the visual space and the actual space um, with the house print, and then sewing everything together, and then I print back another word spelled po. Po means luck in Korean. So how immigrants are coming to the United States with this American dream, but also, uncertainty with the uncertainty, and depending on we're gonna have the luck.
Right. Cool. Yeah. Very interesting. It fits really nicely with the um, intangible object work as well, I think. Well, is there anything else that you want to tell me or things you want to say about this project and kind of where it might go?
Again, we are working on other projects, and then we're Michael, who's crazily working on creating this website. We are also trying to open the season 2 of We the People,
Oh, great.
but it's gonna be, we are gonna have some break.
Mhm.
um, but I really hope this We the People project keeps going, with transnational artists, and we love to welcome other artists as well. And this relationship is really special for me. Nick, I met you at SFAI, but the context we had, like in a conversation when we were at school is still bringing me here, right? And talking about postmodern society and talking about landscape, talking about domestic spaces, it's all coming from you. So I really appreciate it, and then you inspire me a lot also. Um, and I don't know. I just hope things become better. You know,
World. Me too.
word.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I wanted to say too, I have been kind of thinking a lot about how important community is at this time when we're socially distant, and have been feeling really grateful for the communities, that I'm a part of, and of our community that is whatever the Art Institute, but also, this project. I really feel honored to have gotten to share in it. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.